The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals participating in the show. All persons described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions along with adult language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Around 4 a.m. on August 23rd, 1987, a freight train traveling through the town of Alexander, Arkansas, spots something strange on the tracks. By the time they realized what it was far too late. The bodies of two teenagers are run over by the locomotive. What follows turns into one of Arkansas's craziest conspiracies and mysteries. What really happened on that fateful night? You're listening to the Mysterious Brews podcast, and tonight we bring you the case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives.
A Union Pacific train like this one, on its normal route, ran over two teens and changed their families' lives forever. It was August 23rd, 1987, 25 years ago today. The time around 4 a.m. at this set of railroad tracks near Alexander. Train engineers say they saw the teens stretched over the tracks.
Welcome to a deep, dark, dank, moist basement somewhere in the humid as hell bowels of Georgia.
I get so much negative feedback for the moist.
I know that is a word. I'm going to tell you something. There's a lot of people that equate that word with the CUNT word. And I'm like, y'all, those are two different, they're on two different levels.
No, you wouldn't even imagine. Like, I get like, why does he have to say moist? It's like, because that's what it is.
It's extremely moist in this basement. It's humid.
I mean, of the negative feedback I've gotten, moist is the most.
We're doing something right if that's all they're bitching about.
No doubt. I mean, honestly.
I know. All right, so we have a new patron, one Carla Bowers. Welcome to the shit show, Miss Bowers. I think you have something to add, don't you, my son?
I've got a 5-star review, my friend, from HRM512. Good old boys, 5 stars. I absolutely love these guys. Storytelling is great, and I love the humor they incorporate into the dark stories they divulge in. Southern charm at its best, from one Southerner to another. You can't ask for better than that. You really can't.
No, you can't.
We do try to add humor. Some of the stories you tell, some of the cases we cover are just horrific.
Yes.
Horrific.
And
you know as good as I do that we try to add some humor to it, but in a way that does not disrespect the victims.
That is true, senor. That is true.
Maybe it's the little banter we have before or the banter we have after, or maybe whatever, when you mispronounce everything.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. But I learned a while back not to disrespect. I don't think
you. Well, that's what I was going to say. We didn't disrespect. We were reading an article that was the only information we could get our hands on at the time.
That disrespect did lead to me in a relationship, so I don't regret it.
Well, that is true. That is true. Everything happens for a reason, senor. All right, so I fixed the mic cord situation.
Oh, thank God.
I mean, I can touch it now and it don't bump or bust or buzz.
Why would you even touch it? Don't touch it. That's the thing. Don't touch it.
Oh, my God. Here we go. All right. So when we last left you, we had discussed some of Fahmy Malik's greater hits in his...
Jesus.
I know. In his storied career. But as a little refresher, we have the Ives and the Henry families getting a third autopsy done by Dr. Burton out of Atlanta, Georgia. In Dr. Burton's autopsy, it is discovered that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back and Kevin Ives' skull had been crushed prior to the placement of their bodies on the railroad tracks. However, good old Fahmy stood by his ruling that the boys had simply fallen asleep on the tracks after consuming 20 marijuana joints per boy.
That's just overkill. Anyone that partakes in marijuana would know that that's too much.
Well,
there's no point.
Right. You're not getting any higher.
There's only so high you can get.
Well, the other thing that I saw was, and people that don't believe this are wrong. So there you go. The THC levels back in 1987, 86, 90 pot as compared to the pot that we're currently being passed around and the gummies that you can buy legally now in some states, there's no comparison. The pot from 1980s, early 90s was so weak compared to what is out there now. So even if they had, I don't know, on the low end or the high end smoked 5 apiece, like you said, they're not getting any higher. And they've not gotten, you're not going to get to a point where you're like, you know what, man, let me just lay my head down on this cold steel railroad track and take a nap.
Never.
So in Little Rock, all right, disclaimer before we start getting hate mail, we realize that there is a whole rabbit hole, probably an episode and a half if we wanted to go there. And some other podcasts that have covered the Boys on the Tracks did put this in their episode on Henry and Ives, but I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest Cliff Note version of what's going on in Arkansas at this time. Yes, we understand there's tenfold more things that we could have discovered, but this is just the bare minimum that you have to understand so that we can keep moving forward and not bog down in a tangent. So in Little Rock and the surrounding area back in the 1980s, drugs were being, quote, transported to a small airport in Mena, Arkansas. Now, Mena is located roughly 160 miles west of Little Rock. Now, we are not going to go in depth, like I said, in the Mena angle of the story because we would be here for at least another 3 hours. So before you start hating and whining about what we left out, take a minute, take a deep breath, and piss off.
Yeah, piss off.
Piss off. So here's the Reader's Digest version Cliff Notes on the Mena angle, and it goes like this. There were ties to cocaine thanks to a man named Barry Seal, who had been running guns and cocaine out of Colombia and into the U.S. since way before the Boys on the Track. He had been doing this since 1981. Now, he would use low-flying planes to airdrop drug packages in remote areas of Louisiana where his little minions would come in and pick them up and then distribute them. Barry had 12 planes in his operation, and there were so many drops happening that Barry caught the attention of the Louisiana State Police and the DEA. Do you know how bad you got to mess up for the Louisiana State Police to be like, hey, man, there's way too many drugs you're dropping?
Yeah, for real. You're not kidding.
So Barry, feeling the heat, moves his operation to the little bitty Mena, Arkansas airport. Much later, we would learn that Barry was also working for the CIA and would wind up unalived in February of 1986 after a hit was put out on him. So Barry's dead and the drugs are not getting dropped anymore. No, that's not how that works. When one domino falls, they run quickly and make sure that all the dominoes don't fall. Barry was replaced. Now, rumors and internet rabbit hole theories state that, quote, a high-profile politician was involved as well as local police and local legal influences. The high-profile politician could be anyone. We are not throwing shade at anyone that likes to smoke cigars, okay? That's not what we're saying. So, now, As you'll recall from last week, there had been a grand jury convened by one Richard Garrett, the deputy prosecuting attorney of Saline County, Arkansas. And Garrett had named his buddy Dan Harmon as special prosecutor. We discussed the new autopsy performed by Dr. Burton. While that was going on, the rumor surfaced that Kevin and Don may have unintentionally stumbled onto one of these drug or cash drops and were killed as a result. Other rumors going around are that they knew a drop was coming and they wanted to rip it off. The most prominent rumor is that they were looking to acquire the drugs, but, as Coach says, take the cash if it's there.
Absolutely.
I don't see them being like, no, we came from marijuana. We're not going to take this $100,000 in fives. So either way, it's no bueno for a 16 and 17-year-old to be acquiring these shipments. Hell, it's not a good idea for someone in their 30s or 40s to be acquiring these shipments back then.
No, it's not good for anyone. Absolutely.
So there's a couple of ways that we could tackle this, and I chose to just do a loose timeline on people that have or that came forward much later in Gene Duffy's investigation. We'll get into who Gene was and how that all came to be, but we're going to start our timeline with a guy only referred to by the name Jerry. Now, this is not Jerry Tomlin, the train conductor. This is a alias that this guy is going by named Jerry. Now, there's another guy named Mike Crook who was managing a local nightclub called Gigi's. Now, one of the regular patrons is this guy named Jerry. One night, Jerry tells Mike that he probably saw Don and Kevin on the night they died. He said that he was sitting in a convenience store parking lot on the night that the boys died and saw 3 teenage boys. 2 were on foot and matched Kevin and Don's description, and there was another one who was on a motorcycle. Jerry assumed that they were just smoking weed and hanging out. He says all of a sudden a police car pulled up, and the kid on the motorcycle hauls ass out of there. The 2 officers get out of the car and start, in his words, quote, beating the shit out of the other 2 boys, end quote.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir. Now, the officers then threw them in the back of the car, and Mike tells Jerry he needs to report what he saw to authorities. Jerry's like, are you crazy? I'm pretty sure I saw the cop beat the shit out of 2 boys. Why am I going to go tell the cops I saw them beat the shit out of 2 boys?
Yeah, but the question is why? Why would the cops beat the shit out of the 2 boys?
We're going to get to that. We're going to get there.
Are you going to get there?
We're going to get there.
Okay, well, I will wait patiently. And I'll be over here shutting the fuck up.
Oh, you're killing me. All right, so Mike convinces Jerry to go to the authorities and tell them his story. Jerry reluctantly agrees, and the next day he goes to the Saline County Sheriff's Office and tells his tale. Well, Sheriff James Steed says, hey, Jerry, guess what? You owe back child support, and throws his ass in jail for 90 days. So Jerry eventually shows back up at Gigi's and tells Mike Crook what happened. He also tells Mike that Sheriff Steed told him as he was releasing him after his 90 days in jail for him to get the hell out of Dodge and never come back, and that is exactly what he's doing. And Jerry disappears and is never heard from again. Now, according to Mike, Jerry did divulge that he was moving to California, far away from Arkansas. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind for our listeners that did not grow up in a small town, especially a small southern town, the local sheriff in a small southern town, and any small town really, is the judge, jury, and executioner. If that man tells you what to do, you better do it. And that's all I got to say about that.
That's all I got to say about that.
Now, another witness comes forward, and this guy is referred to by the name of Ron. Some people say that his real name is Ronnie Goodwin or Godwin. I've seen it spelt both ways, but we're just going to refer to him as Ron. He also had been at Gigi's the night the boys died, but Ron's tying one on that night, and he decides that when it's time to go home, he's going to drive, and he's going to take the back roads to get home. So
Yeah, that's always a good plan.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're intoxicated,
highly intoxicated from what I can
if
gather
you're
about this.
drunk, the back roads are always a good plan.
Yeah.
Fucking idiot. I remember Sam Kinison, he was like, it's not like we want to drive drunk. It's just there's no other way to get our car back to the house.
And there was no Uber, boys and girls. If there was, I'd have been in hog heaven.
I saw a thing in England where like there's a company that has like little tiny mopeds. And if you need a ride home, they will drive up to you, put their moped in your trunk, drive your car home, and then ride away in the moped.
That's a damn good
That shit
idea.
is genius.
Yes, it is. Put that moped in my boot.
Put in the boot, my friend.
We're going to take a ride, senor.
Senor. What the fuck?
So as Ron is approaching the same convenience store near Shrove Road, and this is the same one that Jerry talked about, he states that he saw an unmarked police car. Unmarked police cars should be marked because everybody knows it's the Popo. Ron said he knew it was the Popo because of all the damn antennas hanging off the trunk. That would be the boot. Now, Ron immediately pulls off on the side of the road in a spot where he could see the officers, but they couldn't see him. And I bet that's what he's thinking. I'm pretty sure that if they had been paying attention, they'd have been like, hey, that old boy just pulled off and cut his lights out. But anyway, so he said that he was just going to wait until they pulled off because he was not in the market for a DUI. And as he is shutting his car off, he states that he saw two officers get out of the unmarked car and approach the boys. Ron says that one of the boys fit Don Henry's description, and he could not tell who the other boy was because that boy had his head down. Now, Ron states that the two officers commenced to beating the shit out of both boys and threw them in the back of their car and drove down a dead-end road. Ron, knowing that that road that they headed down was a dead end, just stayed where he was at. His thinking was that he would just wait until the police car came back out before he started heading back home. Ron said that it took about 15 or 20 minutes for the car to come out, and he could not tell if the boys were in the back or not. He did, however, tell that he knew the officers were both Prescott, Arkansas officers, Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell. Now, some reports state that Lane and Campbell worked for the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office. I don't know if there was like a difference back then, like if Prescott had their own police force or if it was just Pulaski County and everybody kind of just referred to them as the same kind of officers. Now, this would be the county, Pulaski County would be the county that borders Saline County, and in Pulaski is the county that has Little Rock in it, North Little Rock, and Conway, Arkansas.
Sorry if you heard some background noise. I'm dealing with a puppy with the zoomies.
The zoomies after he toot.
Oh, he's got the zoomies big time, buddy.
Mine gets it.
He did some laps. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, I love it when they get those kind of zoomies. Mine gets them about 45 minutes before he's supposed to eat, and he's got 3 legs, and he still gets it pretty good.
Oh my God, I wanted an old dog. I did. I wanted like a 7-year-old Labrador or whatever. But I got a 5-month-old boxer.
Yeah.
And he is teething.
And he likes the soft, white underbelly of anything you have hanging out.
Yeah, I have bought him, I think, 15 toys specifically designed for teething. I have bought him fake rawhides because, rawhide's not good for him.
Get them bully sticks. You know what them bully sticks are?
I have bought him everything you can think of, but you know what he likes?
Your toes?
My toes, my hands, my triceps. One time he bit my my love handle.
Now that shit would hurt.
I never knew how sensitive your love handle was until a dog bit it.
Yeah, they're a little tender.
Yeah, it's very tender. But he's doing puppy time right now. So if you hear things in the background, it's just puppy time.
It's just puppy time.
It's just puppy time.
Yeah, I mean, we all got to have a little puppy time in our life.
Oh, I'm way too old for that shit. I know you are too.
Yep. I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm good once as I ever was.
You gray-bearded bastard.
I know. I got some hate at the family reunion on that. Says it makes me look old.
For having a gray beard?
Yeah. Said that just makes you look so old. And I was like, well, up here, y'all may say old. In the South, we say we are distinguished.
How dare they? Those fucking, man, fuck them people. Just because you have a solid white beard doesn't mean you're Santa Claus, you know?
Just because kids come up to me and ask me where the reindeer are at, it's not too white. All right, so now we have two stories that are basically corroborating one another. While they're not exactly the same, that's what you're looking for when you start getting witnesses' accounts. You want the same premise in these stories.
Exactly.
What we do know is that Ron is definitely not Jerry. We know this because allegedly when Ron tells Mike Crook his story, Mike tells him to keep it to himself because of what happened to Jerry. Now, these two stories are relayed by Mike and the man named Ron when the grand jury is conducting their investigations. Now, we only know about these stories today because Linda Ives started a website where she documented everything that she discovered during her own investigation. Now, the police have not released a public statement asking for anyone that may have seen something on the night the boys died to come forward. Remember, they are holding steadfast to the theory it was a suicide/accident. Yeah, you know, I kind of think that we have a case of...
Right.
You have a case of what?
Right.
What the fuck did that say?
It says right. Austin Powers, Dr. Evil. Right.
Just play it again.
Right.
That does not. That sounds like gibberish to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You might want to give that sample up, brother.
Mm-hmm. So next we have a man named Keith McCaskill. In 1988, Keith was 43 years old, stood 6'3" and weighed over 200 pounds with a monster beard. Keith had a reputation for breaking up bar fights. And by breaking up bar fights, I mean he would just go in there and beat the shit out of whoever was fighting. So during the time that the citizens of Arkansas are calling for Fahmy Malek's head, the fine citizens of Saline County and the city of Alexander are not real happy with Sheriff James Steed. Now, people who knew Keith said that in October 1988, he began acting really weird. Looking back, his friend stated that he was getting his stuff in order like he was about to die. He was also telling people that he was being followed by two police officers. And those police officers are none other than the same two officers that Ron identified as beating the shit out of Kevin and Don. That would be one Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell. Now, on November 8th, 1988, Keith was at his favorite bar, and he was leaving. He pulled 2 pennies out of his pocket, put them on the bar, and said, if James Steed is not reelected sheriff, this is what my life's worth. Sheriff James Steed lost the election, and 2 days later, on November 10th, 1988, Keith McCaskill was found murdered in his home. Keith's body was found in his carport, wrapped in a floral patterned shower curtain. He had been stabbed 113 times, and the inside
Good Lord.
Yeah. And the inside of his house looked like a slaughterhouse, according to people that had seen it.
If you stab someone 113 times, that indicates hate. There's no way that that's like a hit or whatever.
No, that's a
You're
mess.
not going to take.
That's
You're
a
not going to
message.
take the time to stab someone 113 times.
That is a clear hatred message going out right there.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. Somebody fucking hated him.
Yes. Now, they said that stuff inside the house was broken and everything was covered in blood. This was a fight to the death. Now, if you'll fast forward to August 1989, Keith McCaskill's murder is solved because they arrest a 19-year-old man named Ronald Smith who weighed 160 pounds and stood at 5'11". So I just let that sink in for a second. We got a 6'3", 200-pound barroom dancer. And they're telling us that this 19-year-old, 160-pound, soaking wet, 5'11", stabbed him 113 times and survived.
Well, I mean,
ne'er a scratch on this boy.
I mean, if you have the knife and you surprise him, I mean, the first wound could be brutal enough to where it incapacitated him.
True. That is true.
I mean, think about that. But 113 times, man, that's insane.
Okay, so little backstory. Ronald was considered developmentally disabled. They used the hard R back then, but we're using developmentally disabled. And he did not fully understand.
You can't use the hard R.
No, you
can't use that word anymore.
No. There's states that have outlawed that word now. Like in legal.
It's just, it's bad.
In legal proceedings. Not that you can't say it, but you can say it. You can say whatever.
I wouldn't say it's as bad as the N word, but it's pretty bad.
It's pretty hard R. It's pretty hard R, brother.
Considering the line of work we are both in, yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah. So he doesn't understand how the justice system works. And while doing my research, I would kind of equate him to someone with the same IQ as Jesse Miskelly from the West Memphis 3 case. He's a people pleaser. Tell him what to say, he'll say it, and he'll mean it. So Ronald was sentenced to 10 years in prison and has stood 10 toes down on what actually took place the night Keith McCaskill died after he got out. Yeah, he served all 10 years. He said that he was over at Keith's house paying him for some antiques that his mother was buying from Keith. While there, 3 men wearing clown masks bust in. One of them had a gun and the other 2 had knives. Ronald said that he was held at gunpoint while the other 2 men fought and stabbed Keith to death. Ronald was then forced to stab Keith after he was dead while one of the men took a Polaroid picture. So these men tell Ronald that the picture is insurance in case he ever told anyone about that night. Now, if you're thinking that Ronald talked, you would be mistaken. He was convicted without the picture. They just railroaded this poor kid, 19-year-old kid, that did not have a clue what was going on. I know that's a shocker with everything that we've covered in this case so far. Now, the next person we get to is Keith Coney. Now, Keith was friends with Kevin and Don and about the same age, so around 16, 17. Keith's friends and family said that after Kevin and Don died, he completely changed. It was as if something was eating at him. His mother asked him what was going on, but Keith said that he was afraid to tell her. Now, Keith's father eventually draws a line in the sand and tells Keith, "You're not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." Keith tells his father he was with Kevin and Don on the night they died. He had been on his motorcycle, and Kevin and Don had been walking. They all had been smoking some weed near Shobe Road, and out of nowhere, a police car pulls up. Keith tells his dad that he panics and he takes off on his motorcycle and just leaves Kevin and Don behind. Again, we've got a corroboration story here. This firsthand account from Keith kind of corroborates what Jerry told the bartender and what Ron told the bartender. Okay, so Keith was subpoenaed to testify in front of the grand jury, but just a couple of days after he's subpoenaed, he dies. Now, this is going to be an underlying current if you're paying attention. The official story is that Keith was driving his motorcycle and crashed into the back of a semi-truck. Witnesses to this, quote, crash said that Keith was being chased by a vehicle and was trying to get away when he swerved and accidentally hit the truck. People who witnessed the accident stopped to help Keith and said that when they took his helmet off, his throat was slit. You are thinking, was there an autopsy? Nope. Good old Fahmy read the police report and said accidental death.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell that without doing an autopsy. I mean, come on.
I mean, a kid on a bike runs into the back of a semi-truck. They try to save him. When they take his helmet off, his throat's cut. That's clearly an accident.
I mean, clearly. I mean, how dare you question Fahmy Malik? Fahmy Malik has a impeccable record.
What?
Okay. 2 weeks later, 26-year-old Greg Collins was subpoenaed to testify in front of the grand jury. Greg was called in before his testimony to meet with Special Prosecutor Dan Harmon. After a couple of days passed after his meeting with Dan, Greg disappears.
What?
Yeah.
Disappeared.
Just disappeared. A couple of days after meeting with old Danny Boy, he just gone like a fart in a dust storm.
Have they found him?
Well, according to Linda Ives and the Henry family, Greg is never found.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, I take that back. I apologize. He is not. There was another guy that's never found. Greg's body was found, and it was found on January 22nd, 1989 in Prescott, Arkansas, in a wooded area. Prescott's about an hour and 15 minutes southwest of Alexander, where Kevin and Don died. Greg had been shot once in the face and 2 times in the body with a shotgun. We're going to send in Fahmy. Yep, Fahmy says Greg's death, suicide.
Yeah, you usually shoot yourself twice with a shotgun in order to commit suicide.
And then put one to your face.
I mean, a shotgun is notoriously known to not get the job done the first time.
That's weird.
So, yeah, we don't know. Nobody knows except probably Dan Harmon what Greg knew.
Name one time a shotgun did not get the job done.
The shotgun was so infamously known in World War II that the Germans tried to bring up the Americans on war crimes for using shotguns in the trenches. Yeah, but this time it took 3 times.
No. Yeah.
He just shrugged them off like bee stings. Nah, that one didn't hurt. Nah, that one didn't hurt. Let me try one to the face. Anyway, newspapers reported that he was questioned by Garrett and Harmon before he mysteriously died. See, I can see Fahmy saying that he had shot himself in the head first and then decided to shoot himself in the chest twice. See, what had happened was...
What had happened?
So in March 1989, Daniel Bearden, who was around the same age as Kevin and Don, had been missing for 8 months. It was rumored that he was buried in a remote area near the Arkansas River. Daniel's body is the body that's never been found. However, a piece of his shirt was confirmed to be his, and that was found in the area they said that his body was at. Now, Daniel had sold weed on the side and was subpoenaed to testify in front of the same grand jury. Next, we have 21-year-old Jeffrey Rhodes. Jeffrey knew Don and Kevin, and right before they died, he said that Don told him that he knew, quote, the ultimate dealer in Little Rock, end quote. Jeffrey was interviewed by investigator Don Birdsong of the Arkansas State Police, and this is from the state police files. Birdsong's report states that he conducted an interview with a young man that Birdsong does not identify. In his notes, it says that the Wednesday before the boys were killed, someone had contacted this man looking to buy an ounce of cocaine. Now, this could possibly be Jeffrey. The guy in question was unable to procure the cocaine, so he contacts Don Henry. Allegedly, Don and Kevin met with the buyer, and they said that they could get coke from Don's connections. The connection is not mentioned, and keep in mind, Don Henry was 16 years old at the time this allegedly went down. Now, Don's sister, Gayla, was interviewed by the state police and stated that Don had been at the home of an alleged drug dealer to purchase marijuana on the Thursday or Friday before he was killed. She had also heard Don say that he knew, quote, the ultimate dealer, end quote. He didn't name this person, but he said that the dealer worked out of Little Rock. Now, Jeffrey told his mother that he feared for his life. He called his father, who was living in Texas, told him that he needed to get out of Arkansas because he knew too much about the boys on the tracks and Keith McCaskill. Just 2 days after speaking to his father, Jeffrey's motorcycle was found on the side of the road, standing on its kickstand, kind of like he had been pulled over or had pulled over for someone. A week later, Jeffrey's body was found in a dumpster near Benton, Arkansas. He had been shot once in the head. His hands, feet, and head had been partially sawed off, and he had been set on fire. Like someone was trying to dismember him, make sure that he was not identified, and got lazy. Now, an anonymous tip was called in saying that a Benton police officer had pulled Jeffrey over and killed him. Tipster said that some Benton police officers were involved with the Alexander Pulaski County Department as well as Prescott officers. So next, we have a statement from Chris Ballard, who was at one time married to Don's sister. He says he knew he saw Don on Thursday before Don died and said that Don told him he was going to steal some cocaine. Chris also said that Don had mentioned something about this ultimate guy working out of Little Rock. In another of Birdsong's notes from the state police files that was entered in the summer of 1989, it states that there was a conversation with a confidential informant stating that Don and Kevin had overheard a phone call between the dealer and an unidentified individual about a large drug drop near the area of the train tracks. Sergeant Barney Phillips interviewed a friend of Don and Kevin's and said that the night that they had died, he was at a party at a mobile home and the two of them had come by for a little bit. Before leaving the party, he said that they had told him that they were going to get some cocaine so they could sell it and make a bunch of money. So there's a lot of moving parts to this whole thing. I don't know about, we'll get into how I feel about this at the end, but I don't know about that one. So in July 1989, Richard Winters was killed by a shotgun blast to the face during a robbery that had gone wrong. The rumor was that this wasn't a robbery, it was just a cover-up because Richard, you guessed it, boys and girls, he had been subpoenaed to testify in front of the grand jury. So on the surface, it looks like someone's getting rid of some loose ends.
Sounds like it.
Now, Barry Seal did some interviews before he passed away and said in those interviews that local police would stand guard for his drug drops. So that gives a little bit of credence to some of these people saying that there's different law enforcement agencies involved. Now, just after Richard Winters died, James Milam was found dead in his home. Now, this is the case we discussed in part 1 where the man was decapitated. Allegedly, James was a direct witness to Barry Seal's operation in Mena and to what happened to Don and Kevin. Now, remember, this is the one that Fahmy ruled the man died from an ulcer, and then he went on to say that James's dog had completely eaten his head. Now, shortly after Fahmy rules death by ulcer, someone finds James' head in their garbage can a couple of blocks away from his house. Fahmy's got an explanation.
All I'm saying about that ruling is I have absolutely no doubt that if I died, this fucking dog would eat me within a day.
So Fahmy,
he's eating me now. He's eating me now.
I was gonna say
he's toes. He's eating my arms.
Yeah,
he's eating my hands.
He's just trying to test out where the best parts are at.
That's what I'm saying. If I died, no doubt that dog would eat. This dog would eat me. Wouldn't you, buddy? Wouldn't you? Yes, you would. He would.
So Fahmy's got an explanation. He states that James' dog had regurgitated the head. So if you're keeping score at home, we have a dog that eats a head off the corpse, leaving a clean cut. Same dog then decides to take a couple of blocks or walk down a couple of blocks. The head's not sitting real well with the dog, so he throws it up. But before he throws it up, he kind of climbs up and throws it up into someone else's garbage can and closes the lid. The whole undigested head.
So he ate the head whole. And then regurgitated it?
Regurgitated it.
Right. Okay. Whole. Okay.
That's suspicious.
Yeah,
That's
no doubt.
weird.
So in June 1990, Jordan Kettleson was found dead in the front seat of his truck from a shotgun blast to the face. His body was cremated before an autopsy could be done, and there was no police investigation. Not a damn thing. It was like it never happened.
Okay, all right. That's ridiculous.
Jordan got this thing in the mail. It was a subpoena. And
Okay, all right, move on.
I'm not laughing because...
Not saying it's police corruption, but for the love of God. For the love of God.
He's not saying that it's police corruption, but...
They also said that artificial sweeteners were safe, and WMDs were in Iraq, and Anna Nicole married for love.
That is a great sample. Where did you... That's a great movie, absolutely. Did you know?
Yes, I did. Up on Cripple Creek.
Yes, that man in the movie Shooter is the drummer for the band.
And if you don't know who the band is, they sang The Night Old Dixie Died and Up on Cripple Creek. Plus a hell of a lot more songs, but those are the two most famous ones I can think of.
Oh, they're...
Are you saying there's a plethora?
There's a plethora of songs by them that are amazing.
All right, so back to it. Jordan supposedly knew something or was part of the murder of Kevin and Don, as well as the murder of Keith McCaskill. So we're going to jump ahead to 1993, and this is when a man named Tommy Niehaus contacts Kevin's mom, Linda. Now, Tommy was just 12 years old in 1987 when Don and Kevin died. Now, Tommy is now 18 years old and had finally gotten enough courage to come forward. Tommy would tell Linda that the night Kevin and Don died, he and a couple of his friends were out in the woods messing around near the train tracks. They saw some lights and decided to hide. Tommy said that he and his friends saw 3 men on the tracks and 2 other figures that were either kids or teenagers. He said they were definitely smaller than the 3 men. Tommy convinces his friends to move closer so they could see more. After closing the distance some, he said that the 2 smaller figures matched the description of Don and Kevin. Tommy said that the 3 men were calling out to the boys and motioning for them to come over to them. Tommy said it didn't look like the 2 boys wanted to do that. So as the 2 boys are slowly moving towards the men, Tommy says all of a sudden he and his friends hear what they think was a gunshot and saw a flash of light that was extremely different from the flashlights. It's at this point Tommy gets scared and he and his friends take off. Tommy was asked if he could recognize anyone on the tracks that night. He said that he saw his mother's boyfriend there. None other than Special Prosecutor Dan Harmon. Now remember, old Danny Boy was placed into the investigation by his friend Richard Garrett. Now, what a better way to keep tabs on people who may have seen something than being the special prosecutor in a grand jury case into the boy's deaths that you had a hand in. All of the witnesses had to meet with Dan or Richard for a deposition. So now let's go back to 1990. East Arkansas U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks appointed Assistant U.S. Attorney Bob Gover to start a secret federal investigation into drug trafficking and corruption around Central Arkansas. Assistant Prosecutor Gene Duffy was appointed to head up this drug task force, and she was to supply information to Bob Gover's investigation. I swear to God, it sounded like I said the same thing twice. Anyway, so all the information that we have discussed came from either the state police file or Gene Duffy's investigation file. Quickly, she realized that there is a name that keeps popping up, and that name would be Dan Harmon. All of these witnesses either met with Dan a couple of days before they died or had contact with the Saline County Sheriff's Office. So in May 1990, Dan became prosecutor-elect for Saline County, and he immediately started calling for Gene Duffy to be fired. On January 1, 1991, Harmon took over Gene Duffy's task force. He then immediately tries to get a grand jury to indict Gene for misappropriation, but that was a no-go. They were like, nah, ain't happening, Slappy. So Dan, undeterred, calls in some favors and gets a judge to issue a subpoena for Gene to bring Dan the evidence she had collected against him. The families of all of the people who met untimely deaths had spoken to Gene in her investigation. So in a move to protect them, she ignores the subpoena. By doing so, a warrant is issued for her arrest, and at the same time, a $50,000 hit was put out on her. She goes into hiding for 9 months. You may be thinking this is all rumor, innuendo, and conjecture, but you would be wrong. Several years later, it is confirmed by the FBI that someone paid to have Gene Duffy killed. So in June 1991, U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks, out of the blue, shuts down the federal investigation into drug trafficking and corruption in Central Arkansas. He then publicly clears Dan Harmon and other public officials of any wrongdoing. And you may be thinking, somebody got to Chuck and told him to shut the hell up, no more investigation. And you would be correct. Someone got Chuck. So in August 1991, Dan, he is feeling 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and he is ordered by a court to have a mandatory drug test. Since he is a public official, that's something they got to do every year. He says, I ain't doing it, and spends 18 days in jail. You would think by doing so, he would lose his position, be fired from his position as Saline County prosecutor.
Yeah, but this is Arkansas.
Bingo.
So I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no, brother.
Someone clears it up, and he remained the Saline County prosecutor like nothing ever happened. So in 1993, a woman by the name of Charlene Wilson is testifying in a separate criminal case in front of a separate grand jury. She testified that in 1987, she was dating one Dan Harmon. Now, keep in mind, Dan is married at this time. Again, if you're keeping score, he is dating Tommy Niehouse's mom. He's married, and he's dating Charlene Wilson.
He's a PIMP.
Yes, sir. So word of Charlene's testimony makes its way to investigators that were trying to figure out what the fuck is actually going on in the Don and Kevin case. Charlene was brought in to answer some further questions by these investigators. They wanted to know what went on between her and Dan Harmon regarding drugs. Charlene said that Dan basically kept her high most of the time, and she went on some drug drops with him. Intrigued by her little confession, investigators asked her if they were going to investigate Dan further, where should they look or where should they start? Charlene says they should reach out to Dan's ex-wife, Rebecca, and then go through every detail they could find regarding his money. She also said they needed to look back through drug offenders that were let off the hook while Dan was in office, as well as drugs that kind of, went missing from the evidence room. So investigators then asked her about Don and Kevin. Charlene said that she rode with Dan to meet a man in Alexander. She said that this man was named Keith, and when she described him, he matches to a T a man we've already covered, one Keith McCaskill. So, suffering from information overload, investigators asked Charlene to take them through the day, from morning until night on the day that Kevin and Don died. Charlene said that she woke up, did some Colombian bam bam, and then cleaned her house like a champ, I bet. That afternoon, Dan came over, Dan Harmon, and wanted to show Charlene a house in Alexander. After they looked at the house, they went back to Charlene's and had some food. She put on some makeup that evening, and then the two of them went back out to Alexander. Dan tells her that he needed to go back there because he needed to meet up with someone. Now, this is the man that Charlene described as Keith McCaskill. She states that They then drove to a road not far from some railroad tracks. Dan gets out of the car. Before closing the door, he throws her a bag of cocaine and tells her to stay in the car. So Charlene starts enjoying Columbia's finest export in Dan's car, when all of a sudden Dan comes running up to the car and pulls a green tarp out of the trunk. He then runs back toward the tracks. See, she must have been mistaken, because we were told that green tarps are just figments of train crews' imaginations. You know, that shit doesn't exist. But anyway, not a lot of time passes when Dan comes running back, gets in the car, and said, "Let's go." They drive back to Charlene's house, where Dan tells her that she had to take a shower immediately. As she is getting in the shower, Dan heads back to his house in Saline County. So Detective John Brown is the one that's kind of interviewing Charlene, and he's got this sneaking suspicion that old Charlene may be withholding some key information or some important details. He believed what she had said so far, but he felt like she had a little bit more to say. So Dan Harmon, on the other hand, gets wind of Charlene's testimony and interview with the investigators and starts threatening Detective John Brown. Brown, unfazed by Dan, pushes forward with his investigation. Detective Brown gambles in his next interview with Charlene and tells her that he knows she has not been completely truthful. It works. And Charlene tells him that her and Dan get to the same dead-end road near the railroad tracks, and Keith McCaskill was already there waiting on them. Now, in this version of the story, Charlene gets out of the car with Dan, and they walk with Keith McCaskill to the tracks. When they get to the tracks, Charlene said that there were already two other men there, and they were all pissed off because a group of boys tried to rip off their drug drop, or they felt like a group of boys were trying to rip them off. The other two men tell Dan Harmon and Keith McCaskill about how they chased these kids, but they got away. It's at this point the two police officers showed up with two of the boys. Only the, I guess, less intelligent could not surmise that these two boys they showed up with would be Don Henry and Kevin Ives.
But why, though?
Well, it all goes back to, and we'll get into it a little bit heavier, but basically either Dan thinks these boys tried to rip him off, or he had been ripped off previously and his goons were in the area trying to make sure this drop went off without a hitch, and they see these boys. So
yeah, but I mean, it doesn't make sense that the boys would be.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm not
I
arguing
mean, if you're
that
saying
point.
that they ripped them off or whatever, it's just a coincidence that they were in the area.
So the story goes like this. So either Kevin and Don knew about these drug drops and they were there to see what they were all about, or they were totally innocent in this whole thing and was truly out spotlighting when they see a low-flying plane drop something, go over and investigate. Harmon's goons see them near the drop, freak out, can't identify them, start chasing them. They've had some problems with drops in the past. They chase them down, etc.
I mean, that makes more sense than Kevin and Don being aware.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I 100% agree with you.
I definitely don't see them being aware of what they were seeing. I definitely think that they saw something they shouldn't have.
Yes, 100%.
They were disposed of.
Yeah. Now, Charlene goes on to state that one of the boys was already dead when the police bring them back to the tracks. Charlene tells Detective Brown that it is at this point that Keith McCaskill killed the other boy that was still alive, and Dan Harmon forces Charlene to stab that boy. Basically, like, now you are an accomplice. We have your prints on a knife that was used to stab one of these boys, so don't even think about talking to anyone. Now, Charlene Wilson's statement, along with Tommy Niehouse's statement, led the FBI to start an investigation. So in December 1993 and again in April 1994, the FBI reaches out to Jean Duffy. The first time she's like, no, I ain't playing this game. The second time, I guess they convinced her to come out of hiding. And they asked her to be part of their investigation and bring forward all of the evidence that she had compiled. So sidebar here, after Charlene talks to Detective Brown the second time, Dan is livid, has Charlene arrested on like a minor drug charge, like she had 1/8 of an ounce of marijuana on her. She is convicted and sentenced to 30 years.
Damn.
Yes. You talk about some home cooking. Charlene.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Charlene actually serves, I think, 4 years of that sentence before the governor of Arkansas at the time, Mr. Mike Huckabee, pardons her. And I think that was in 1997. Now, by the time Charlene talks with Detective Brown, for those of you not paying attention, Bill Clinton has already left the governor's office and he is now president of the United States. So that's why Mike Huckabee is the one pardoning her. So here's a little nugget that comes to light during the FBI's investigation in 1994. When Unsolved Mysteries ran their 2-part episode on the Boys on the Tracks in 1988, Dan Harmon and Richard Garrett were on that episode. I believe it was Richard Garrett who says, quote, "I think that this was drug related," end quote. So at the end of the episode, Unsolved Mysteries asked for anyone with any information to call into the show. Garrett had convinced the producers to refer any tips to a direct investigation line. So when people are calling in telling what they knew or what they saw about either the boys or drug drops, they're immediately threatened by either Garrett or Dan Harmon. In the FBI's report on the show and threats, it states, quote, "Individuals would call with information and a formal statement was never taken. The individual would then be threatened by telephone to keep his or her mouth shut," end quote. So it would appear that some very high up influential people or person could have possibly allegedly told the FBI to stop doing what they doing because in 1995, they stopped their investigation. They released a statement. It says, quote, "Based on the foregoing, it is my recommendation that the FBI conduct no further investigation into this matter." And this is written by Ivan C. Smith, Special Agent in Charge, FBI Office, Arkansas. So in November 1996, Dan Harmon was still the Saline County prosecutor. Charlene had been sitting in jail for a couple of years, and by all accounts, Dan is still eyeballs deep in some shady shit. During this month, Dan's wife gets arrested outside of Dan's jurisdiction with a metric shit ton of Colombian Bam Bam in her possession.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it just so happens that the Colombian Bam Bam is still in the bags that says evidence of Saline County.
Oh, so she stole it from the locker.
Well, according to her, she didn't steal it. She was told by her lovely husband that she needed to take it somewhere and give it to somebody.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, you know, it's
That's suspicious. That's weird.
So Dan is finally forced to resign, not for his wife having cocaine evidence in her possession that had Saline County Sheriff's Department on it, but he's forced to resign because he assaulted a reporter from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. See, this reporter had a set on him and asked Dan for a comment on his wife's arrest, the allegations that he stole cocaine from the evidence room, and a plethora of other shit Dan's doing. Dan punches the guy outside the courthouse in front of at least half a dozen witnesses. It's almost like someone had told them to look into some missing drugs from the Saline County evidence room. You know, kind of like his former mistress, Charlene Wilson, did. So in April 1997, a federal grand jury indicted Dan Harmon on racketeering, drug trafficking, manufacturing of methamphetamine. Oh, this keeps going, so pay attention. Extortion, witness tampering, and retaliating against an informant. Also arrested are 2 other men. One was a local attorney and the other was an administrator of the Drug Task Force. Dan was convicted on 5 counts of racketeering, 3 counts of extortion, some charge of conspiracy, 1 count of marijuana distribution. He was only sentenced to 8 years in prison with an additional...
Only 8?
Yeah. So he's convicted, okay? Convicted on 5 counts of racketeering, 3 counts of extortion. And he gets 8 years, and they tack on, I think, 3 more years for some petty-ass different drug charge. After he is sentenced, 900 criminal cases were thrown out that he was involved in. In 1999, the Arkansas Supreme Court decides that Dan Harmon can no longer practice law, and they disbar him.
Yeah, you would think they would.
Yeah, after you get convicted of extortion and racketeering, you may not be able to practice law.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
It's not a stretch. So in 2006, he was released from prison, and after assisting prosecutors in a murder conspiracy case, he was let go. Time served. In 2008, Dan was once again employed by none other than Saline County, this time as a file organizer for the circuit clerk. All right, so in February 2010, after a 6-month drug investigation, he was charged yet again for selling morphine and hydrocodone near a school. Problem with this one is that the prosecution's case was weaker than well water, and the only testimony they had that Dan actually did it was the guy that he actually sold the drugs to, so they throw that out. Going back to one Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane, these 2 police officers that were allegedly the ones that beat the shit out of Kevin and Don and threw them in the back of the police car, well, they would wind up with promotions. See, Jay Campbell became a police chief, but ultimately he was sentenced to 40 years in his part for running a criminal enterprise.
Of course he was.
He was released on good behavior and did not serve the full 40. Kirk Lane also...
How long did he serve?
I think they said he served less than 15.
Damn.
Kirk Lane, the other officer, also became a police chief in another part of Arkansas. He, on the other hand, stayed out of trouble and, as far as I could find, retired as chief of police. Linda Ives filed a civil suit against the CIA and the FBI and multiple police departments for violating the Freedom of Information Act. She had filed a ton of FOIA requests, and when she would receive them, it would be 90% plus redacted. She felt like it was a slap in the face, so she sued for over-redaction. In November of 2017, a federal judge ordered 3 defendants in the suit: the Executive Office of the U.S. Attorney, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Department of Homeland Security to turn over documents for private review that had been formally redacted. During this ruling, the same judge dismissed several agencies from Linda's suit. They included the CIA, the U.S. State Department, the FBI, the Arkansas State Police, the Saline County Sheriff's Department, and the Bryant Police Department. Her lawsuit was ultimately completely dismissed in 2019. Now, in between Linda filing her lawsuit and it being dismissed in 2019, you have a former WWF wrestler, Billy Jack Haynes, come forward.
Billy Jack.
Yeah, he comes forward and he says that he had some information about what had happened to Kevin and Don. And KARK in Arkansas interviewed Billy Jack, and he claimed to have a videotape of the boy's death because he was there that night as the muscle for the drug operation. When he was asked if he still had the videotape, he said, quote, "Well, that's something my private investigator and I haven't decided to say. Where, why, or anything. That's up to the private investigator," end quote. What we know for sure is that he was employed by the WWF from 1986 to 1988. In his claims, he said that it was his job to videotape these drug drops, kind of like a post-game conference on how well the operation went. Billy Jack said that some incredible things also occurred in his life. He would go on to state that Stone Cold Steve Austin was responsible for Roddy Piper's death and a bunch of other outlandish shit.
I mean, why on earth would you want to videotape the drug drops?
See, guys, I mean, we could kind of move up a little. We could get more in line right here. We need to close them gaps now. We got to, you
The angle of the camera, your flashlight's flashing all over the place. Somebody's going to see us. We got to tighten this up, boys.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way you would want to videotape a drug drop.
No, there's no way in hell you would do it. But anyway.
Did he ever produce said videotape?
Oh, we going to get that, dear sir. So what we do know is, what we do know was, he goes on to claim that he was living in Arkansas at the time of the boy's death, and he said that he received an envelope after a wrestling show one night. Inside said envelope was a phone number with instructions to call the, quote, criminal politician. Yeah, like you're going to be like, hey, refer to me as the criminal politician, call this number. No. Anyway, allegedly the criminal politician really wanted old Billy Jack to work for him after seeing him on WWF. He went on to say that Don and Kevin had their hands cuffed behind their backs. Now, as far as we know, there was no evidence the boys were ever bound at the scene. Remember, also, the conductor said that he saw that they were lying with their hands by their side, so Billy Jack's standing on a whole lot of nothing. When asked if he still had it, he did refer to it being given to someone for safe holding, and his private investigator would release it if he saw fit. Unfortunately, Linda Ives passed away in 2021. Her website, idfiles.com, is still up and running, and it's where I found most of my information. She has some maps, some drawings, so if you want like a real good visual representation of where the dead-end road's at, where the tracks are located, the distance, that kind of stuff, where things were found, those are on there. Sadly, I do not believe that justice will ever be handed down in this case. About a week before Don and Kevin's murders, it was reported that, and this has been authenticated through police reports from the time, there was a guy walking around the same area of the tracks in military fatigues. Police are actually called, and the man is spotted by authorities. When he was approached by officers, the man in question opens fire on the officers. In doing so, the authorities turn tail and seek cover. While they're doing that, Camo Boy escapes. Now, people living in the area of the tracks where Don and Kevin were murdered reported seeing the same man in the same area the day the boys were killed. Camo Man is yet another weird angle of this case. Richard Garrett, who pushed for Dan Harmon to be the special prosecutor, several years after Kevin and Don's murder, Garrett sells his home and moves away. So the guy that buys Garrett's home had been living there for a few months, and he discovers a secret room in the basement that contained what he believed to be a drug lab. So the new homeowner reported this to his local sheriff's office, and he was told, hey, just take those items to the local dump and get rid of them. He's like, hey, I've seen Law and Order before, and explains to the sheriff he's not taking those items in his vehicle and potentially getting pulled over with drug paraphernalia in his possession. The sheriff's like, yeah, we see where you're going with this, and they offered to escort him to the dump so that he could dispose of those things. The new homeowner has no idea who Richard Garrett was. Didn't know anything about Garrett's involvement in Kevin and Don's murder. So he has no axe to grind or looking for 15 minutes of fame. He just finds this drug lab in a hidden room in the basement. We get to Fahmy Malik. You know, the famous, or better yet, infamous medical examiner.
I would say infamous for sure.
In 1991, he gets promoted to become a consultant for the Arkansas Health Department. And when he does, he kindly, quietly disappears. He ultimately passes away. I don't have the date on that, but in his obituary, it lists all of his children, which I believe he had 4 children, most of which were either doctors or other high-ranking medical professionals. So my theory, and then, Coach, you can hop in here and interject where you see fit. All right, so after going through all this shit, my theory is that Keith Coney, the boy on the motorcycle, was actually with Don and Kevin at some point that evening. They were all probably smoking joints, hanging out near the tracks. I believe that either they knew a drop was coming and wanted a piece of the pie, or they witnessed the drop And when they went to see what had been dropped, they run into Dan Harmon's minions. I'm kind of leaning towards that latter one. I really don't think they knew what the hell they were doing. I don't believe the boys were positively identified by Dan's minions at first. Just some teenagers were near the goods, and we now have to go find them and make sure they don't talk. Being naive as to what they had just witnessed, the boys truly thought that if they just laid low for a couple of hours, no one would be looking for them. I think Jerry's version of what he saw is accurate. I believe that's corroborated by Don's version. I also believe that Kevin and Don somehow meet back up with Keith at the convenience store, and they're all like, damn, man, can you believe we got away from them? That's crazy. And they smoke a joint to calm their nerves, and then all of a sudden that car pulls up. Keith hauls us out of there, but the cops grab Kevin and Don, beat the brakes off of them. And this takes us to where Charlene Wilson sees the boys on the tracks that night as the two officers are bringing them to Dan Harmon. I really do believe that either one of them was already dead from either being struck in the face with the butt of the rifle, or, as some have theorized, he was struck in the face with a payphone receiver. I'm not 100% sure if they set out to beat them to death or if they accidentally killed one of them, and then it was like, well, shit, we now have to kill the other one.
I mean, my theory is much simpler than that. I mean, you have weaved a web. I think that they just stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen, and they disposed of them promptly. I don't think, I mean, honestly, I think they just came upon a drug drop, and they were just executed immediately.
So I've gone back and forth with it. I mean, I can be talked into just about anything. I really don't think they set out to rip off anybody. But you've got a lot of people out there that said Kevin and Don somehow gained the information that there was these large drug drops going on, and they could have.
Yeah, but they're fucking teenagers, man.
Oh, I know they are.
What are they going to do?
I agree with you.
Even if they have that information, they're fucking 17, 18 years old. Like, what are they going to do with the drugs? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. You're right. But this is the other side of the coin. So for the sake of an argument, they could have overheard someone at a party stating that they had seen a drop and took part of it, and no one was the wiser. So they're like, hell, let's go get us a piece of the pie. The problem is the guys whose drugs these were knew it was short from a previous drop. So this is where you have Dan and his minions out there that night to make damn sure all the drugs are accounted for, or all the cash. They were going to use whatever force necessary if they caught whoever they thought was stealing their drugs.
If you're a senior in high school and you come across, let's say you got one brick, maybe a kilo, let's say a kilo of cocaine, what the fuck are you going to do with it?
In Central Arkansas, I don't know. They'd probably make a shitload of money, but you'd be scared to death to do it.
Yeah, but how? I mean, like...
Well, that's where I'm my worst enemy on this theory, and this is why I kind of shoot down this theory, because from the way that I've seen how Linda Ives and her husband Larry, Kevin's parents, parented, that shit wouldn't have flew. I don't even think he could have lied to him and kept it from him.
Well, I'm just saying, like, at 17, you remember way the fuck back when you were 17.
Like 30 years ago?
Would you even fucking know how to fucking distribute cocaine?
No, I wouldn't have. Hell, I could barely get to class.
That's what I'm saying. You're talking about two naive kids that I'm just saying. I don't know, man.
Oh, I no. I agree with your theory. Like, I'm on your side. I'm just giving the other theory that's out there. This is the other prominent theory.
Okay.
Now, the way this keeps going is you got Dan and his cronies who are pissed off that they have this drop that's short. They're out there to make sure that the entire drop is made. Now, the way this goes, you could have had a squirrely pilot that is like, hey, Dan, yeah, man, I made that drop. It's not my fault you can't find it. It's not my fault. Yeah, it's right there. Right there. And the pilot could have kept the damn drugs himself. Now, following that angle, maybe Dan is just can't find the drugs, and Dan owes someone for these missing drugs, so his ass is on the line. This would make him irrational when it comes to finding the boys or seeing the boys that evening. Also, if you take in consideration what Charlene said as fact, Dan had been snorting coke most of that day and was probably out of his fucking mind when the minions find Don and Kevin. I don't think, and I'm with you, I think deep down they didn't know, Don and Kevin did not know what the hell was going on. I think they saw something, they hear a low-flying plane, they see something fall from it, and they go and investigate it. Here's the problem. They're teenagers, like you said, and when you're 16 and 17, you think you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof. I really do believe that Don was extremely comfortable in the woods at night because he probably went out at night with his parents' permission several times a week spotlighting. I think he convinces Kevin, hey, man, let's just go hide, let this shit blow over. And they do, and then that's when they meet back up. The only thing I think you have is you got a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old kid who are curious about marijuana and probably told Mr. Henry that they were going spotlighting, and what they were really doing was they were going out there to get some time to smoke a joint or two.
They definitely did not smoke 20
That's
fucking
exactly
joints.
right.
I guarantee that.
Right. I believe that at most they probably had one each, maybe two each, or maybe shared a third one at the payphone.
No, I mean, have you ever smoked weed?
Yeah, I think they may have had one and then shared a joint.
You don't smoke your own joint. You share it.
Well, I understand that. I'm just saying.
I'm saying they had like 2 joints, maybe.
So each
three
one of them,
at
yeah.
the most.
So each one of them had a joint and a half combined.
Yeah. So 20 fucking joints is ridiculous.
Yeah. I believe,
ridiculous.
I think the Dr. Burton from Atlanta, I think he said that more than likely the most they smoked was 3. I think they got that dime bag that was found in Don's pocket for the next day. I think he was like, hey man, let me get another dime bag off of you so we have something to smoke tomorrow. I do not buy the story that they were going around all that week looking for cocaine.
They did not get to it.
Well, that's true. They could have just not gotten to it. But like I said, I don't believe the story that Don's going around trying to get cocaine and trying to start pushing cocaine and become drug dealers at the ripe age of 17. Unfortunately for them, they stumbled across the wrong people. Dan Harmon could not even had a drop stolen or come up short. He may have been told by Jay and Kurt that they had just seen some flashlights in the distance and that someone may have seen the drop and asked Dan what he wants to do about it. Having spent most of the day with Charlene doing coke, Dan tells them to make sure whoever it is doesn't talk. I think that you've got a case of where maybe they chase down Don and Kevin. It gets out of hand quickly. Unfortunately, they smash Kevin's face in and knock him unconscious, and they think they've killed him. Then I think that's where the oh shit moment kicks in and they panic. They take the boys back to Dan. Dan thinks that the kid's dead too. So they kill the other boy and then hatch that plan to lay him on the tracks. Here's the crazy thing. Tommy Niehaus, who was 12, remember, he was the one that was out there with his friends. He stated that he had been out there that evening. This easily could have had him as one of the boys on the tracks. Some people have theorized that his friends are the ones that actually saw the drop, went to investigate it, and were chased. And Don and Kevin just got mistaken. They were actually out there hunting and then get chased out of there. Well, all right, so we know that Dan was a person that carried a lot of power from his position as a prosecutor. Secondly, as a big-time drug dealer, he also had some power. You also have Garrett with a lot of power and influence. This allowed the two men to leverage a lot of people in some higher positions. I believe that Garrett was the one running in the upper echelons of Arkansas's elite, and Dan was his drug connection. I also believe that Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane were Dan's muscle. Conveniently, they just carried badges as well. I think Dan's biggest problem was he started using with the people that Garrett put him in contact with, And this made him even more of a loose cannon and a narcissist, like he was untouchable. If you watch the documentary that's on YouTube, I believe that Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane sue the makers of said documentary for defamation, something like that. And in that documentary, they have an investigator that is like, no, this shit went on. I've got the files, this is that. They've got him on camera. This fucker somebody gets to him, and he tells during the civil suit for defamation that he tried to tell the documentarian producer he shouldn't talk about Jay and Kirk. So shit's still tied to this. It's a little nuclear if you live in Arkansas. What's crazy is a lot of people outside the state of Arkansas and don't really know a whole lot about it. I don't know, man. That's my 2 cents. So, you got a recommendation there, brother?
I'm going to recommend the movie Untraceable. It's on Amazon Prime. It's crazy. I watched it a few nights ago, and I liked it. It's kind of like Saw, but not really. I'm just saying. It ties it all together at the end very well, so I'm going to recommend that.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to recommend Linda Ives' website. Someone is still keeping that up and running, idfiles.com. Again, there are interviews with her. There's interviews with some other people on there. All the files that she was able to procure, maps, pictures, all that stuff's on there too. So if you are interested in that, you can dive down different rabbit holes by visiting that website. Let us know what you think. Also, let us know if you are interested in us covering the Barry Seal Mina angle. We will do our best to touch the drug drops in a kid glove because we have been told that we need to be careful when discussing things that occur in Arkansas.
Yeah, definitely. The Clintons, they have a very strong reach.
All right, ladies and gents. Coach, you got anything else?
Oh, I don't.
Deuces.